Hi everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I'm Angelia, and today I'm going to do sort of a quarterly roundup of my top 10 books that I read in January through March. Since I started my channel in April, I never have had a chance to talk about the previous books that I really loved from this year. So I thought I'd get that down, and then I can look back on it later and see how my assessment changes as I read my way through the year. And maybe you'll find something good in here that you haven't read yet, or if you have read some of these, let me know in the comments what you thought about these books as well. Okay, so I looked in my journal. I keep a reading journal, and in here I have my consideration list that I add books to that I want to read, that I see them at the bookstore, I hear about them in a video, I read about them in a book review source, and then I try to track them down and read them. And then I put down the book that I read, the date, and my thoughts. So I looked through it and I made my top 10 list, which of course now I've turned away from that page, so I have to find it again. And we're going to review these in no particular order and just share a couple thoughts about each one. All right, so, and it is May the 4th, which is why I've got my Star Wars shirt, although it's, I might wear a Star Wars shirt on some other day. Okay, so first of all, we have Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. I really loved this book, and I would be shocked if I read so many things that were so great that it fell out of the top 10 by the end of the year. I bought it and it sat around for a month or so because I had, big book mental obstacle, but then I finally got around to reading it, and I was very curious about it because I read kind of people saying they loved it, and then other people saying that they found it hard to access or it was confusing, they got lost. So I started to read it, and I am a big sucker for multiple narration and multiple time settings. Like, I love books that go back and forth or have several different narrators and things like that. So none of that threw me off in this book, because there are several different times going on. There's Constantinople in the 1400s, right before the city is besieged. There's two characters in that time that are in separate places that eventually their paths will cross. There's also a current day story that's taking place in a public library where an older man is helping some children put on a play, and a teenager is about to commit a crime. And then there's backstories of that teenager and of the older man and their history through life coming up to this point. And then we have in the future, like 500 years in the future, a young girl named Constance who is on an airship that is traveling to find a new colony for humans to live on. And so it sounds very disparate, but their stories have a commonality that I don't want to give too much away, but there's something that connects them all that eventually you find as you read along. And the book has a lot in it about the power of reading and stories, about the power of librarians or the keepers of the stories, and the essential way that can connect us together. That sounds pretty vague because I don't want to give too much away, but it's really excellent. It somehow manages to be devastating and uplifting at the same time. So read it and find out. All right, the next book is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. Erdrich. I've heard her name pronounced a couple of different ways, but I probably need to look up and see how she says it herself. But this is an author that I have read over the years and almost always enjoy very much, and I really love this book as well. Now, this is an interesting one because I read it and I just fell completely in love with the main character, Tookie, her family, the group of people that she works with at a small bookstore in Minneapolis that actually is Louise Erdrich's actual independent bookstore, and she is a character in the book, but in a minor way. But I loved it. It is kind of the description makes it sound like it's a ghost story, and that's not really what it is. The people in the story are kind of haunted by things of their own creation more than the actual ghost that is in the story, although there is a ghost. But what compelled me about this book were those characters, their story, and then eventually, further into the book, how they navigated living in Minneapolis during the COVID crisis and during the protests after the murder of George Floyd. And most of the characters in the book are Indian, and she has some great lists in the back of further reading about Indigenous lives, Indigenous history, and then not just that, but also these lists. Ghost Managing Book List, Short Perfect Novels, the Sailboat Table, which is a feature in the bookstore, and then the Indigenous literature lists, Tookie's Pandemic Reading. So this is another one where the book has a lot to do about reading and stories, and even the title, the sentence, has several different meanings. And it was interesting to me to hear that a lot of people thought it was a good book, but they didn't totally connect with it, because it was like a gut puncher to me. I really, really felt this book hard. So anyone else who has a comment on that? I know that it made the short list for the Women's Prize, and people had different opinions about whether or not they wished for it to win, but I would not be mad if it won. All right. The next one is the next two are classics that are grandfather claused in Pride and Prejudice. I did a reread. It's one of my all-time favorites, and I felt like reading it again, and it didn't disappoint, and it's still one of my all-time favorites, and it will be each and every time it ever comes up on a reading list. Also, Catcher in the Rye. Love it or hate it, I love it. I love it forever. I loved it when I was 14. I love it today. I am Team Holden all the way. I know he's annoying. I know he's immature. I know the book is out of date, but I love it to the end of my dying days. My all-time favorite novel. One that I don't have a picture of that's also a classic is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which I read for a online book group, and this one was the one that really surprised me because I almost stopped reading it about 30 pages in. I thought, this is going nowhere. It's boring. Nothing's happening. It's just people thinking, why is this so beloved? But I decided to stick with it and kind of get over my own tendencies to read for plot and character, and it rewarded me. It made it up to a scene at a dinner table that just glued me in for the rest of the book. And I really avoid books that are described as like a contemplative or a meditation on life and loss and grief, or a metaphysical exploration, like anything like that. I'm just like, next. But this one, if you haven't read it, the very brief description is it's about a large family, the Ramseys, that have about 8 kids, and they have a kind of a British by the seaside type of big ramshackle house, and a group of family and visiting writers and artists and things come together for various holidays at this house. And the first part of the book takes place during one of these, and there's a little boy in the story who really wants to go on this little boat trip over to see this lighthouse, and his mother tells him, well, tomorrow if the weather's good, we'll go to the lighthouse. And then it just veers off into, there's his thoughts, his mother's thoughts, various family members and guests' thoughts, and I'm going to make it sound dreadfully boring, but eventually it's really, really good. And it takes place in 3 time periods. That time period from 1910 to 1920, so you have the war in between, and the characters growing and changing, people growing up, marrying, people dying. But so it doesn't tell you, like, it doesn't stay with them. It's like a vignette, and then there's a middle piece, and then another piece of the people in 1920. So can't tell you anything more about that, but it surprised me that I liked it and that I kept thinking about it after I read it. All right, the next one, short stories, 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King. I really loved Euphoria and Writers and Lovers by this author. So, and I'm on kind of like a short story revival. So I got this and I love these short stories. They're really good. If you have not been reading short stories later, please have a revival as well. And I especially loved the stories, the first story, Creature, and also the one called When, I don't know how you say this word, When in the Dordogne, Dordogne, When in the Dordogne. Those are my two favorite stories, but really they're all extremely good, and I don't even want to describe and give them away. If you like short stories, just give it a try. And on the short pieces kick, we also have These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. If you're a fan of Ann Patchett, I highly recommend this, especially if you loved The Dutch House, because she does talk in here about so the time period of some of the essays is kind of around when she was writing that book and after she wrote that book. And you do find out about the cover of that book with the painting and the girl, and also the cover of this book. There's an essay that she writes about her 3 fathers, which is her father and 2 stepfathers that she has had. And I really love that essay because she is about my age, and it also made me think how I could write an essay like that about my dad, my stepdad, and my father-in-law, and I could talk about my 3 fathers as well. She talks about how she ended up becoming really good friends with Tom Hanks' personal assistant, and there's some of it gets into during the quarantine times. And anyway, I found it, if you like her and her voice, you will probably enjoy this book. Then I will put a picture up of the next book because it was a library book which I sent back, and that book was The Chosen and the Beautiful, and I should have stayed on the page. The author's name, I think, is Nghi, and this book was really, it was so lush and beautiful. This is for fans of The Great Gatsby who are open to a reinterpretation of that story with magical realism and queer characters. So think about The Great Gatsby and how just the settings and the time period, and think about Gatsby's house and the parties and the beautiful clothes and the music and the men and the women and everything. And all of that is there in this book, but so different. Because in this story, it's told from the point of view of Jordan Baker, who is a minor character in The Great Gatsby. That is the young woman that Nick Carraway is dating during the summer that he gets embroiled in the whole thing with Jay and Gatsby and Tom. So in this story, Jordan is the main character telling the story, and she is an adopted Asian woman who is I'm going to say, I guess she's pansexual. She doesn't make a definition of it, but just from the events of the book, would be my guess. And a lot of the characters in the book are queer, they're bi or pansexual. And so when you have those, the famous love triangle in the book of Jay Gatsby and then Tom and Daisy Buchanan, the triangles multiply when the other characters, well, I don't want to give it away, but just to say it gets more complicated. It's like a Venn diagram of triangles, and also there's magic. So there's a fantasy element in the book that I also can't tell you too much about because it would ruin some plot points. But a lot of the scenes from The Great Gatsby are there. The characters are there. You have the main character having a lot of experiences of being alienated and an other, more due to her ethnicity than her sexuality, because she is adopted into the family, so she has inherited the wealth and the privilege, but she's sort of like the exotic little girl that they brought in, and then she gets included or unincluded at different times based on this, like she's sort of a novelty item, and so she's just becoming an adult and chafing against those identity labels on her. So anyway, I'm a big fan of The Great Gatsby, and I really enjoyed this different take on the story. And that is The Chosen and The Beautiful. Then I have two more. I have Still Life by Sarah Winman. This was a totally random thing that I picked up at the thrift store, but I knew I had heard about it. I thought, I think this is supposed to be a good book. And it was like for $1.50 at the thrift store. So I looked it up real quick, and it had all these great reviews, and I thought, wow, and it was very pretty. And I just enjoyed this book so much. It's one of those kind of, found family assemblages of people. It takes place in both a pub in Great Britain and also in this fabulous Tuscany villa, and that is inherited by one of the characters in the story. And there's a lot of different people. Some of them are together all along. Some of them leave and come back toward each other as the story. It's one of those things that goes over decades. So it begins right after World War II. Well, it starts during World War II, and then after, and then it goes on, I think, all the way up into the 70s. So I loved the characters. I loved the group that they made. There was one person in the story that really puzzled me, and I really didn't understand her throughout the book. I really tried, and I feel like the main characters in the book did a better job of accepting and understanding her than I did. But that was my only real quibble with this book. But pretty much I really liked the storylines in here. And this is also another one that has more diversity amongst the characters about their sexuality, and without it being it was in time periods where maybe that wouldn't be so acceptable, but within the group of these people it is. So I liked that as well. The love and the acceptance within the group of people. So that was Still Life by Sarah Winman, and I'm going to look for other books by this author. And then last but not least, that I did talk about in my other video, was Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is an author that I like very much, and I absolutely loved this new book by her. And in some ways it did remind me of Cloud Cuckoo Land because of the different time periods that were drawn together by the end of the story. All right, so those are my favorites so far. I would love to know what yours were as well. If you enjoyed this video, please like and consider subscribing, and I will be back soon with some more thoughts on my reading. Thank you. May the 4th be with you. Bye.